Have you ever stopped to wonder what history truly is? That sacred scripture of our past, taught to us as fact beyond doubt or question. But is it really truth, or only a shadow of it? What if history is not a mirror but a mask, woven of ambition, power, and fear? For every monument raised to the skies, how many manuscripts were burned in silence? For every victory carved in stone, how many rival names were erased with a chisel? And for every story we still tell today, how many others were condemned to vanish into dust because they dared to ask the wrong questions? This is not a tale of wild conspiracies. It is the darker current beneath the official chronicle, a record of cover-ups, erasures, and silences so carefully crafted that generations grew up believing they were truth. Because history is never just about what happened. It is about what rulers decided was safe enough to remember. Since the first cities rose from clay and stone, power has carried with it a darker privilege, the power to shape memory. Emperors, popes, dynasties, and conquerors did not simply leave monuments to celebrate themselves. They destroyed what came before. They burned libraries, they scratched rivals from tablets. They declared dangerous stories as heresy and silenced them until all that remained was whisper. And the most terrible truth? What perishes first in every collapse is not walls nor temples, but memory itself. One missing manuscript severs centuries of understanding. One revised timeline buries the legacy of an entire people. And once a story is branded taboo, it lingers only as rumor trembling in the dark. We know the famous wounds, the Library of Alexandria consumed by flames, or forbidden archives locked deep in Vatican vaults. But there are subtler mutilations. A suppressed paper never published, an ancient map dismissed as a forgery, an inconvenient discovery quietly deleted from the curriculum. With each act, history bent a little more, until the crooked path was mistaken for a straight one. And so we grew up believing that the past was neat, linear, absolute, when in truth it is fractured, contradictory, and haunted by shadows. The silence, that is what should terrify us most, because once no one dares to ask what has been hidden, the guardians of memory no longer need to burn books. They only need to wait. Generations will forget that there was ever another story. So ask yourself, who holds the pen that writes the chronicle humanity is forced to believe? And are you ready, truly ready, to look at the past differently? Because once this door opens, it will never close again. When people think of the Library of Alexandria, they imagine a palace of knowledge. 700,000 scrolls, a treasury of astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and myths, gathered from every horizon touched by Greek ambition. But what haunts us is not just the size of its archives. It is the way they died. In 48 BCE, during Caesar's siege of the city, flames spread from the harbor to storehouses, and scrolls by the tens of thousands vanished. Yet this was only the beginning. Later conquests, decrees against pagan knowledge, and invasions swept through the city, each wave eroding the library like the tide. Was this merely misfortune, accidents of war, or was it deliberate? A systematic purge of dangerous knowledge. Knowledge that dared to question divine authority, political permanence, the myths that kept empires standing, Some scholars whisper of manuscripts smuggled away before the flames, hidden in secret vaults. Others believe the most heretical works were intentionally destroyed first, with the fire used as a veil to erase the evidence. Imagine Alexandria not as a library, but as a mirror. A mirror that reflected the world too truthfully for rulers to tolerate. Inside were creation myths that dethroned gods, cosmic models that displaced humankind, and histories of civilizations that flourished without empire. Had they survived, the story of humanity would not be a clean line of chosen empires, but a tangled web of competing truths. Instead, all we inherit are fragments, scattered letters, and the eternal emptiness of loss. Few recall that while Alexandria burned, another library rose, Pergamon, seated high upon a hill in Anatolia. A rival to Alexandria, its halls held 200,000 scrolls. Kings sent emissaries across the known world, hunting manuscripts as if knowledge itself were gold. So fierce was the rivalry that Egypt banned the export of papyrus to Pergamon, forcing its scholars to invent parchment. What began as scholarship became a cold war of memory. Whoever owned the most scrolls could shape the intellectual map of the world. But Pergamon's glory ended in silence. When Rome inherited its kingdom in 133 BCE, something strange occurred. Entire shelves of manuscripts vanished, spirited away under cover of night, or burned before Rome could claim them. Were they destroyed by Pergamon's own guardians to deny Rome their use, or seized by Rome to centralize memory under its empire? The result was the same: silence, catalogs gone, works of physicians, poets, philosophers erased from the record. One modern scholar wrote, "If Alexandria was a treasure burned to ash, Pergamon was a treasure dismantled piece by piece until only the walls remained to testify that knowledge had once lived there. And in that silence, the line between accident and intention vanished forever." While Greco-Roman memory crumbled in India, the Buddhist world nurtured another immense archive. From the reign of Ashoka, palm leaf manuscripts carried sutras and commentaries across Asia. For centuries, these collections preserved the voice of the Buddha in its earliest form. Yet today, almost all are gone. War swept through in the 12th and 13th centuries. Monasteries burned, monks were slain, and libraries smoldered for months. Chroniclers wrote of smoke carrying the stench of sacred paper across the plains. But war alone cannot explain the silence. Where are the texts monks may have fled with? Legends tell of scriptures hidden in Himalayan caves or carried into Tibet and Nepal. But none have re-emerged. Instead, we are left with later copies, rewritten, translated, reshaped, were inconvenient texts quietly abandoned, teachings too dangerous for dynasties or sects to preserve. Was memory trimmed from within, just as conquerors destroyed it from without? We will never know. What is certain is that our vision of early Buddhism is a hollow echo, missing the manuscripts that once held the unaltered words of the Dharma. Again and again, memory is broken, bent, erased, not because knowledge was useless, but because it was dangerous. Dangerous to kings, dangerous to priests, dangerous to empires. And so it was silenced, Perhaps the greatest power in history is not to own knowledge, but to decide who may know it. That is the secret history beneath the one we are told. And once you glimpse it, you can never unsee it. Among the ruins of India, archaeologists still uncover the stone foundations of Nalanda and Vikramashla, once great sanctuaries of learning. Pedestals where thousands of manuscripts once rested still stand in silence, but the shelves they bore are empty. The pages, the voices of centuries are gone. Their absence does not feel like time's decay. It feels like a wound inflicted deliberately, a slow surgical erasure of memory, so precise, so silent, that history itself no longer remembers who held the torch. As in Alexandria, as in Pergamon, so too in India, knowledge was not merely lost, it was unmade. And yet the question refuses to die. Were the scriptures truly turned to ash? Or do they still sleep in the dark hollow of a mountain cave, waiting for an age when humanity is brave enough to face its own forgotten truths? If India's tragedy was cloaked in conquest, China's was declared openly, carved into the annals of power. In 213 BCE, Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified the fractured warring states, issued a decree that has haunted memory ever since. The burning of the books and the burying of the scholars. It was not hidden behind excuses of war or religion, it was proclaimed as necessity. Unify thought, strengthen the empire. Prime Minister Li Si, a zealous legalist, feared the persistence of rival histories, Confucian classics and philosophies that could undermine the emperor's rule. And so, with calculated resolve, he ordered that all texts, except those on agriculture, medicine, and engineering, be surrendered. The rest were thrown into bonfires in the capital at Xianyang. Eyewitnesses claimed the night sky glowed red for miles. Bamboo strips curled into smoke, centuries of reflection on virtue, justice, and the order of the cosmos dissolved into ash. A year later, the purge darkened further. Confucian scholars who resisted were condemned, buried alive in mass executions, their silence bought with earth itself. Some Han historians later exaggerated the numbers to vilify Qin. But even stripped of propaganda, the truth is chilling enough. For the first time in recorded history, an empire claimed the right to decide publicly and without disguise what humanity was allowed to remember. And in that decision, Qin built not only the Great Wall, but also a foundation of instability. For no order based on forced amnesia can remain unshaken forever. Across the ocean, centuries later, the jungles of Mesoamerica bore witness to another act of obliteration. The Maya, masters of astronomy and time, inscribed their wisdom on bark paper codices coated with lime, filled with glyphs that danced like constellations across the page. Thousands once existed, today only 4 remain. Why? Because in 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa, an agent of conquest and faith, gathered the manuscripts and set them ablaze in the town of Mani. In his own words, he declared them the works of the devil. In the flames went astronomical tables, eclipse cycles, dynastic epics, sacred rituals. knowledge accumulated over centuries reduced to smoke while Maya elders watched, tortured for secrets they would never give. The bitter irony is that Diego de Landa, the destroyer, also became the sole chronicler of the glyphs he sought to erase. His writings, warped by zeal, are today the very key scholars used to decipher fragments of the script he annihilated. The survivors, the Dresden Codex, the Paris Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Grolier Codex, are not in Maya lands. They sit in European libraries, relics of conquest, haunting reminders that the Maya past is preserved by foreign hands. Was this destruction merely religious fervor, or was it strategy? For when you burn the books of a people, you do not only kill their gods, you erase their history, their ownership of land, their right to identity. While empires silenced pagan texts, another scripture flickered and then vanished into shadow. The Book of Enoch. Enoch, seventh from Adam, the man who walked with God and was taken into heaven. His book, once beloved among early Jewish and Christian sects, spoke of watchers, angels who descended, who gave mankind forbidden knowledge. Metallurgy, astronomy, rituals. Knowledge that corrupted, knowledge that brought the flood. It raised questions that unnerved the guardians of orthodoxy. If salvation was divine and singular, how could angels rebel and teach on their own? If wisdom itself could be sin, where was the line between knowledge and heresy? Enoch's words were quoted in the New Testament. Jude 1:14 echoes his prophecy. Yet by the 4th century, church councils banished it. Dangerous, heretical, unfit. In the West, it disappeared for 1,500 years. Only in Ethiopia did the Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserve it, guarding its Ge'ez version while Europe forgot. When Scottish explorer James Bruce returned with manuscripts in the 18th century, scholars stared in shock. Here was a cosmology unlike any they had dared imagine. A forbidden memory resurrected. Why was it erased? Perhaps because it hinted at truths the church could not control. That knowledge might come from outside divine authority. That salvation might not need their sanction. And so the Book of Enoch was buried not by fire but by decree. If Enoch was silenced by neglect, the Gnostics were hunted with fire. They whispered that the world was not made by a perfect God, but by a flawed demiurge. That the divine spark lived within, and that salvation was not granted by priests but awakened by hidden knowledge. Gnosis. Such teachings were intolerable. If truth lived within each person, the authority of the church collapsed. And so the campaign began. The Gospel of Thomas, Philip, truth, the Apocalypse of Adam, condemned as lies, seized, burned. For 1,000 years, the Gnostics survived only in the words of their enemies, until 1945, when a clay jar cracked open in Nag Hammadi and spilled secrets buried for centuries, 50 texts, intact voices of a suppressed Christianity. What if they had survived openly? Would Christianity still be a single thread, or a tapestry of competing truths? Long before, Babylon itself held libraries older than empires, archives of astronomy, medicine, and myth, tablets that spoke of kings, floods, and stars. Excavated in the 19th century, thousands were shipped to museums in London, Berlin, Paris. Yet some vanished. Reports whispered of tablets that contradicted accepted history, records that blurred the neat timelines of empires. Were they lost in the chaos of excavation, or quietly locked away, sealed in academic gray zones where translation is forever delayed? When power fears truth, silence is as effective as fire. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, one stands apart, etched not on parchment but on metal. The Copper Scroll. It lists 60 hidden caches of gold and silver, treasures beyond imagination. Real or symbolic? No one knows. For decades, governments have avoided the question. Excavations are scarce, results unpublished. If it is symbolic, why carve it in copper meant to last eternity? If real, why the silence? Perhaps because treasure is dangerous. Perhaps because truth would provoke disputes over the land, the faith, the legitimacy of nations. And so the Copper Scroll sits, its words frozen in metal, its secret untested. And then there are stories so strange that history itself recoils. In the 19th century, across the United States, reports spread of giant skeletons unearthed from ancient mounds, 8-10 feet tall. They appeared in the New York Times, in Scientific American, in dozens of regional papers. Each time representatives of the Smithsonian arrived. Each time the remains vanished. No records, no displays, only silence. Were they hoaxes? Misidentified bones? Or were they truths too destabilizing? Evidence of a forgotten chapter of humanity, erased by those tasked with keeping the official story clean. From India to China, from Mesoamerica to Babylon, from the deserts of Judea to the valleys of America, one pattern endures. Knowledge is never only lost, it is erased, hidden, controlled. By fire, by decree, by silence. And always we are left with the same question. What else remains buried in the ashes, waiting to awaken? The mystery of the giants lingers like smoke on the horizon. Reports of skeletons 8-10 feet tall filled newspapers in the 19th century. Scientists from the Smithsonian arrived, took the bones into custody, and then the remains disappeared, swallowed into silence. In 2014, a sensational article claimed the Smithsonian had been forced to admit destroying thousands of anomalous skeletons. The institution denied it fiercely, branding the story a hoax. But denial is not disproof. Skeptics insist the silence itself is evidence that what vanishes behind closed doors often matters most. Native traditions add fuel to the fire. The Iroquois, the Choctaw, and others tell of red-haired giants, ancient rulers of the land, defeated long before Columbus. When skeletal remains surface in the same regions as the legends, the line between myth and history blurs into something unsettling. Today, America's ancient mounds remain, grassy humps dotting the Midwest. Local museums sometimes display oversized tools, fractured bones too thick to belong to ordinary men. But a complete skeleton, verified and open to academic scrutiny? None. Only rumors. Only absence. And absence itself becomes its own kind of monument, silent, accusing. If the giant bones vanished into museum basements, so too did countless excavation reports. From the 1880s through the early 20th century, expeditions fanned across Mesopotamia, North Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Americas. They produced thousands of pages, detailed drawings, field notes, glass plate photographs. For a while, the records were open, accessible. Then, strangely, by the mid-20th century, especially after World War II, many simply disappeared. The British missions to Iraq in the 1920s described layered ruins at Nineveh, Nimrud, Kish, sites whose dating contradicted neat historical timelines. T.E. Lawrence himself hinted that inexplicable tablets were quietly locked away. By the 1950s, the reports no longer appeared in catalogs. Gone. In America, early surveys of the Cahokia Mounds painted a picture of a sophisticated indigenous civilization, urban, monumental, advanced. Too advanced for the racial prejudices of the time. By the 1930s, the reports were recalled for correction. The corrected versions were never seen again. In France, archives from Indochina documented strange inscriptions, anomalous dates at Angkor and Mysun. By the 1970s, the files were sealed, labeled for preservation. Decades later, many remain locked. Why? Bureaucracy, underfunding, war. Or was it something more deliberate? An invisible hand removing every piece that didn't fit the puzzle. We return to Egypt, to a place so familiar it risks invisibility. The Giza Plateau. The pyramids rise from the desert like eternal sentinels, but beneath their sunlit faces lies shadow. 30 meters below the Great Pyramid, explorers once entered rough-hewn chambers. Unfinished rooms, narrow shafts plunging into blackness. A pit whose depth no rope had ever fully measured. In the 19th century, Petrie and Caviglia mapped them in detail. For decades, researchers descended, photographed, speculated. But in the late 1990s, access was abruptly cut. The reason? Structural safety. Yet the upper passages remained open to tourists with tickets in hand. Why close only the depths? Modern scans revealed cavities, immense voids never before recorded. Some independent researchers whispered of hidden rooms, sealed archives, ceremonial halls. Official statements dismissed such claims. Preservation, they said. Nothing extraordinary. But in ancient Egyptian belief, the underworld chambers beneath the pyramid were not nothing. They were the hall of trials, where souls faced darkness before rebirth. So what waits below? Empty rock or a secret humanity isn't yet permitted to face. The only images of these depths are faded photographs, relics of another age. Everything since then is silence. Controlled silence. Across the world, high in the Andes, Lake Titicaca glimmers beneath the sun, 3,800 meters above sea level. According to Inca myth, it is here the children of the sun first emerged to found an empire. For centuries, whispers told of stone cities drowned beneath its waters. In 2000, divers and sonar confirmed the whispers, walls in geometric patterns, staircases, monolithic columns, ceramic offerings. A submerged city, vast and ancient. Perhaps Tiwanaku, perhaps something older still. The announcement shook archaeology, and then everything stopped. Funding withdrawn. excavations suspended, artifacts sealed. 2 decades later, no maps, no carbon dating, no published inventory. Only fragments, press releases, a handful of photographs. Official explanations spoke of cultural sensitivity, of resources suddenly gone. But locals around the lake had been supportive, proud. The silence felt less like respect and more like burial. What if these ruins tell a story that predates Tiwanaku, a civilization even older than Inca memory? What if their iconography links the Andes to cultures across the sea? Questions too disruptive, perhaps, to answer. Today, tourists skim across the glittering lake, unaware that beneath them lies a stone city asleep in the dark. Records locked away, findings withheld. A forgotten civilization silenced not by time, but by choice. From the vanished bones of America to the missing reports of Mesopotamia, from the sealed chambers of Giza to the drowned temples of Titicaca, one pattern emerges. What is hidden, what is buried, what is silenced is not always lost by accident. Sometimes silence is strategy. And once again, we are left with the same question. How much of history is memory and how much is carefully curated forgetting? High in the windswept Bayankara Mountains where Tibet kisses the edge of China, a story began in the 1930s that refuses to die. It is a story of caves, strange skeletons with elongated skulls and hundreds of stone discs etched with spirals no one could read. The Dropa stones. If the reports are true, they spoke of beings who fell from the sky, forced to live among the mountain tribes, weaving a tale of survival and interbreeding that sounds more like mythology than archaeology. In 1962, Professor Sum Nui allegedly translated their script, but soon after he disappeared, his name erased from directories, his research expunged. No photographs survive, no verified specimens remain, just rumors of museum displays hastily removed and whispers of archives sealed before anyone could look too closely. Skeptics call it one of the 20th century's greatest hoaxes. Believers point to the silence itself, the absence of denial, the erasure of records, the refusal of institutions to even address the question. And so the Dropa stones linger in a twilight realm between archaeology and legend. Impossible to prove, yet strangely difficult to bury. The silence itself becomes the evidence. From mountains to museums, the story shifts to another category of dissonance. Parts, out-of-place artifacts, objects that should not exist where they are found, artifacts that defy their timeline. The Antikythera mechanism, pulled from the sea in 1901, dismissed for decades as nonsense, until X-rays revealed its impossible precision. An ancient computer 2,000 years ahead of its age. The Baghdad battery left in obscurity until whispers suggested it might have been used for electroplating in antiquity. The mysterious Klerksdorp spheres of South Africa with grooves too perfect for chance. The London hammer encased in stone older than humanity itself. Some are misdated, some are hoaxes, some are misunderstood. But the real enigma is the response: silence, withdrawal, reclassification, not studied, not displayed, but quietly removed from public view. If they are false, why not prove it? If they are real, why not admit it? The pattern is the same. Artifacts too disruptive are banished to basements, pending verification indefinitely. In 1986, beneath the turquoise waters off Yonaguni, Japan, a diver stumbled upon a submerged monument. Colossal terraces, sharp angles, stairways descending into the abyss. Was it nature's geometry? Or the work of an ancient civilization drowned at the end of the last ice age over 10,000 years ago? Professor Masaki Kimura mapped it, even proposed it was a ritual complex older than Japan itself. But as media frenzy grew, official support collapsed, funding dried up, data disappeared, survey maps and sonar scans remain unpublished, locked away. Skeptics insist it is only sandstone eroded by the sea. Yet the question lingers. If it is just geology, why has so much of the research been buried along with it? Today you can dive there yourself, trace the perfect right angles with your own hands. But you will not find an official report that answers the question. Yonaguni remains drowned twice, once by the ocean and again by silence. If the sea buries truth, so too does convenience. Across Europe, medieval cathedrals and castles are said to rise from the 11th and 12th centuries. But in their foundations lie stones that whisper of older ages. Roman masonry, unexplained tunnels, mortar carbon dated centuries before the official construction. Chartres, Reims, Strasbourg, Dover Castle, Marksburg. Restorers in the 19th century noted the anomalies. Some even published them before their notes disappeared, archives altered, or conclusions softened. A 1,000-year-old foundation stone relabeled as 12th century because the narrative demanded neatness. Is this conspiracy or simply the human preference for clean timelines over messy truths? History became a tapestry ironed flat, a linear story easier to memorize, easier to glorify, easier to own. And in that flattening, centuries may have been lost. In China, the Song dynasty left behind meticulous chronicles, volumes of daily life, decrees, disasters, wars. But they were not untouched. Twice they were revised, once under the Song themselves and again under the conquering Yuan. Records of trials vanished, negotiations with rival dynasties disappeared, reformers erased, rebels recast as villains, concessions softened into vague lines. The result, a perfectly coherent history, suspiciously coherent, printed for centuries as truth. But whose truth, the vanquished or the victors? And then there is Egypt, where erasure was deliberate, sacred, absolute. Akhenaten, the heretic king who declared the Aten, the sun disk, the sole god, defying millennia of tradition. He built a capital at Amarna, rewrote rituals, changed art, and challenged the priesthood of Amun. When he died, his successors struck back. His name chiseled out, his images smashed, his memory cursed. Yet his documents were not all destroyed. Many were sealed away, buried in archives and tombs. The Amarna letters hint at a fragile Egypt on the brink, a king more reformer than fanatic. But most of the tablets remain unpublished, locked in museum basements, withheld from the public for over a century. What do they say? Why are they still hidden? Perhaps Akhenaten was more than a heretic. Perhaps he was a visionary who threatened the wrong elite. And perhaps the truth of his reign remains sealed in crates of clay tablets gathering dust while the official story repeats. Fanatic, failure, forgotten. From Tibetan mountains to European cathedrals, from Japanese seas to Egyptian deserts, the pattern remains unchanged. Discover, announce, silence. Artifacts vanish, records are sealed, findings postponed indefinitely, and we are left with the same question again and again. How much of our past is truly remembered, and how much has been carefully managed, edited, erased until only silence remains? To prove or disprove whether Nefertiti ruled after Akhenaten, or whether Tutankhamun was truly his son, is no small academic footnote. It would redraw dynasties, unsettle museums, and even shift the legitimacy of those who guard Egypt's heritage today. In Cairo, crates of Amarna tablets rest untouched, sealed in the same dust that has gathered for centuries. Only a select few scholars are ever allowed near them. Tourists flood past Tutankhamun's golden mask, unaware that the truest story of his father, his revolution, his exile, his erasure, lies hidden just meters away, locked behind iron doors. And the quieter question lingers. If those tablets are ever read in full, how much of Egypt's past will collapse like sand, forcing us to begin history anew? If Amarna reveals how power erased a king, medieval Europe shows how the church became custodian of all knowledge itself. From the moment Christianity became Rome's official faith, the church stretched its authority beyond theology into science, medicine, history, and philosophy. Monasteries and cathedral schools preserved texts, yes, but they also filtered them. Origins daring speculations about the soul. Condemned as heresy and burned, passages of Galen that hinted disease might be natural, not divine, excised. Aristotle's natural philosophy, forbidden from lecture halls until it could be domesticated under theological supervision. And then came the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, a list of forbidden books that lasted nearly 4 centuries. Bruno, Galileo, Copernicus, all branded too dangerous for the faithful. To preserve truth, the church copied manuscripts. But to preserve power, it shaped which version survived. What we read today may be less an echo of antiquity and more a carefully redacted script. And at the heart of Christendom, a vault. 90 kilometers of shelving, the Vatican Apostolic Archives. Galileo's trial. The fall of the Templars, letters dividing the New World between Spain and Portugal, entire kingdom secrets, locked away, restricted. Since 1881, a trickle of scholars has been allowed inside, but always under the church's gaze. Notes censored, browsing forbidden. They say secretum only meant private. Yet what is private to one man can be the silenced truth of the world. And so the Vatican's labyrinth remains both archive and tomb, a place where memory breathes but does not speak. If the Vatican hoarded memory, the Jesuits shaped minds. Their schools, spread from Europe to Asia, trained generations of elites. They taught mathematics, astronomy, literature. yet always within invisible boundaries. Copernicus could be mentioned but not believed. Descartes quoted but only as a servant of faith. Knowledge was permitted but tamed. And in this way, an empire of thought was built, not by burning books but by shaping students, by ensuring that even free inquiry bent quietly toward obedience. What happens when knowledge loses its voice? Sacred geometry once bound temples, mandalas, cathedrals, and pyramids into cosmic order. Circles, stars, spirals were not just measurements but metaphors, whispers of unity between spirit and matter. But modernity stripped geometry of its soul. Today it survives only as lifeless diagrams in textbooks, angles, polygons, formulas, its original meaning cast aside as superstition. Perhaps this is the quietest erasure of all. Not the burning of books, but the draining of symbols until only hollow shapes remain. In the ruins of Sumer, clay tablets spoke of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, of gods who regretted their own wrath. But when European translators faced these voices, they bent them to fit the Bible's frame. 28,000 years became 280. Angry gods became righteous. Complex laws reduced to echoes of the Ten Commandments. By the time fuller translations emerged, the simplified versions were already enshrined in classrooms, carved into the minds of generations. And so Sumer, the first civilization, was not allowed to speak in its own tongue. Its voice was refitted to harmonize with ours. Those who challenged timelines paid dearly. Virginia Steen McIntyre dismissed for dating stone tools to 250,000 years ago. Thomas Lee silenced after unearthing artifacts older than Clovis theory allowed. Careers burned not by evidence but by its refusal to conform. Science insists it loves disruption, but science is also human, and humans fear the crack in the mirror. Not only bones and books vanish, films too. Reels of Teotihuacan's murals showing cultures older than Aztec. Withdrawn. British footage of Roman masonry beneath Bronze Age mounds, sealed. American excavations hinting at ancient humans, lost to sensitive archives. It is one thing to silence a scholar, another to silence the image itself. A reel of film can ignite revolutions. Better perhaps to let it rot in the dark. The Piri Reis map, with Antarctica centuries before its discovery. The Qing dynasty's world scrolls, showing America's coastlines long before Columbus. Polynesian charts of star paths erased from naval manuals to preserve Europe's claim of discovery. Each case raises the same unease. Perhaps humanity knew the world long before the story we repeat to ourselves. Perhaps discovery is not conquest, but remembrance. And then Puma Punku, the H blocks. The diorite cut to tolerances modern engineers still marvel at. Exposed under Andean skies, they sit unstudied, not because they are hidden, but because they are too visible, too impossible. When evidence cannot be explained, sometimes the only option is to avert the eyes. Burned libraries, erased kings, forgotten voyages, vanished reels. Suppressed translations, artifacts lost in crates, maps sealed in archives. The pattern is not accident, it is repetition. memory controlled again and again across centuries. And so we arrive at the final unspoken question. History, this grand story we inherit, memorize, and trust. Is it the truth of our ancestors, or the consensus of those who held the pen? The most precious thing is not the artifact, nor the archive, nor the map. It is the courage to ask the question no one once asked. Because history is not dead. It is alive. It resists closure. It breathes through every doubt, every forbidden scroll, every silenced scholar. The past does not belong to the victors. It belongs to those who dare to look at the silence and whisper, "What are you hiding?" And perhaps one day the silence will answer,